Welcome to Hey Chaplain. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. I believe that cops deserve more encouragement, so on this podcast, you'll hear from fellow officers who have been where you are, sharing their wisdom, experiences, and the lessons they've learned. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain are going to help you navigate with confidence through your career and beyond. I hope that today you'll make it your goal to share this podcast with one other person. That's how podcasts grow. Tell someone that you listen to Hey Chaplain and then show them on their phone where and how to get it. Help them download an episode if they're not sure. Tell them why you feel you've gained something from the show. It's your recommendation that'll make all the difference. Today we're talking about drug interdiction. Stopping vehicles traveling through the middle of the United States on rural highways and finding drugs and cash and the criminals who transport them. Our guest today is Troy Foster, who worked interdiction on Kansas highways for most of his career before a series of personal tragedies almost led to him taking his own life. If that's a sensitive subject for you, then please, listener discretion is advised. Troy started in a very small Kansas police department, which meant nearly always working alone, with backup being a sheriff's deputy or a state trooper who might be 20 or 30 minutes away, and worst case scenario, needing to call and wake somebody up to be your backup. But this operating environment helped make Troy a very self-reliant, clear communicating officer who was soon poached by a neighboring sheriff's office. That's where we pick up his story. Here's Troy Foster. So the sheriff's office was interested in you. What did they want you for?
So God blessed me with a gift of interdiction. And I don't know why, but I started doing interdiction. We had a main highway that came through our town, which went right to El Paso, Texas. But that highway was used by people from California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. So it is the busiest two-lane highway in the state of Kansas, and it ran right through the town I worked in. So I just got good at doing criminal interdiction.
Now let's define that. What do you mean when you say interdiction, and what did that look like for you?
Okay, so interdiction is you're stopping cars. It's traffic. If it's cars, motorhomes, it can be boats, semis, whatever's going down that road. You're stopping those vehicles, and you're talking to the occupants. Mm-hmm. And so interdiction can be you're interdicting drugs off the highway, mm-hmm. You're interdicting the illegal cash that's going for drugs, or you're interdicting criminals that are going down the road, mm-hmm. that are wanted for homicides, burglary, whatever it is. There's a warrant for them. You're interdicting those things on the highway.
In your context, what was the most common kind of interdiction? Are you finding drugs and money? Are you finding fugitives? Or what was most common for you?
For me, drugs and drug money was the most common thing for my interdiction experience.
Okay. Part of the time you had a drug dog, but you didn't always. So what's somebody looking for? If you're good at interdiction, what are you doing? Are you reading the behavior of the occupants of the vehicle? Or are you looking for other telltale signs? What kind of things were you finding, and what were you looking for?
There are a lot of indicators that interdiction officers look for. I did not have a canine unit for the first 3 years that I did interdiction. So what I can tell you for myself is body language is huge. And how people respond when they see law enforcement or a patrol car on the side of the road or when they meet you head on.
Yeah.
And so body language is just different when you're a criminal and you know that, police are watching you or they're looking for those kind of activities.
So you're driving down a 2-lane road and a car is coming the opposite direction, and you have a few seconds as you close to see the occupants of the other car. What are you noticing body language-wise in that brief instant?
Well, one in particular I can tell you that I specifically remember is it was August and completely summertime out and hot. And most people don't have their windows down in a vehicle. I was just leaving the city limits, and I I have a vehicle approaching me, and the guy has his all of his windows down, but we call them felony Christmas trees. There's those Christmas trees that they're air fresheners.
Right.
And he had probably 20 of them dangling in his car. And as he approaches me, just as we're meeting one another, he makes eye contact with me and then sticks his head out the window as I pass him to see where I'm going.
Oh, you're right, to see. Okay.
Yep. So as I'm watching him in my mirror, I see him go over the left or the center lines.
Right.
And so at that point, I have a reason to stop him.
Right.
And so I made a stop. And this guy pulled into a gas station real quick and jumped out and put the gas pump in as if he needed gas.
Right.
But, long story short, his car was full of gas. He was it was one of his tactics to try to get me to not look at him.
So just looking busy or something specifically with being at a gas station?
I think if he thought he pulled in and needed gas, that I would keep driving on by.
Oh, okay.
But I already had probable cause to make a stop.
So go back to the air fresheners. Why all the air fresheners?
Well, this particular individual, he had, it ended up being about 120 pounds of marijuana in the trunk. And so those air fresheners are just masking agents for raw marijuana.
Does that even work?
It does not most of the time. Yep. Unless you have allergies or, a cold or something where you can't smell.
Right.
And especially in the heat and that time of the year, you can smell raw, pungent marijuana coming from the trunk.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. So you're looking at body language. Can you give me another body language example?
It depends on where you're at. So if you're sitting on the side of the road, which is one of the things I like to do, and just watch people go by, you and I, if we're driving down the road and we know we're not doing something, we'll at least look over and acknowledge a patrol car, check our speed probably, and make sure, we're not going to get stopped. But there's certain body language they'll act like if I don't see him, he won't see me.
Right.
There's that 1,000-yard stare where they're just gripping the steering wheel really hard and they're looking straight ahead and acting like they don't see you. That always kind of grabbed my attention.
Okay.
And so, after you get them stopped, there's several things that body language-wise that you should really be watching. One of them is just how they talk to you. When someone is super nervous, they're going to be stuttering. A lot of times they won't make eye contact with you. And if they do, they'll briefly look you in the eye and look back down, or they'll avoid looking at you.
Okay. Do you feel like you got good at discerning the difference between a person who's just anxious that they're going to get a speeding ticket versus someone who's in the middle of a felony?
That is a great question, Jared. So what I like to do, everybody does interdiction different. I always brought the person back to my car. For one, if there's more than one, I always separated them. Mm-hmm. But if a person is not involved in criminal activity, it's normal to be nervous. I mean, even if you're an officer off duty and you see red and blues in your window, you're kind of like, what I do?
Yeah.
There's just this instinct of nervousness. But once I would bring them back to my car and tell them why I stopped them, and then if I told them that I was only going to write them a warning, a person that's not doing something criminally will end up calming down because they know what the expectation is.
Yeah.
When they're involved in criminal activity, they don't calm down at all. In fact, they stay nervous the whole time, and you'll hear the stuttering in their voice and the shaking of the hands.
Yeah.
And there's several other indicators that we look for as well.
Yeah. And the more you saw that, the more you got a feel for what that looks like.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's certain questions that interdiction officers ask. And so depending on how a person answers those questions will kind of determine. For me, I could tell within about 4 or 5 questions if there was criminal activity involved right off the bat.
Okay. When does it get to the point where you start looking for like hidden compartments?
That's usually involved in the search.
Okay.
So, when you're walking
So you're
up,
always looking for hidden compartments?
Well, an interdiction officer's eyes are always looking at things on a stop. So, for instance, when I walk up to a car initially on the stop and say there's 2 occupants or 1 occupant in the vehicle, I'm looking to see what's inside the car. If there's luggage, if there's fast food, a lot of fast food wrappers. When someone is taking a load from point A to point B, pretty much they're just stopping at drive-through restaurants and grabbing food to go. Mm-hmm. So you're looking for all that. You're looking to see, again, luggage in the vehicle. If there's suitcases or bags in the back seat, why are they not in the trunk? You're using your senses as well, your smell, your eyes, and your ears on those stops. But you're looking from the very beginning of that stop of different indicators.
Do you remember the first hidden contraband that you found?
I do. Gas tanks are a very big thing that the cartels in Mexico will use. One of my first concealment areas was a gas tank, and what led me on to that is the occupants were coming from a known drug city, going to a known drug city. Their stories did not add up at all, and they were super nervous. When we opened the trunk, there was nothing inside of it. And so what I did is I carried a blanket in my trunk. And so I would always wait for backup to get there, but I would get out on the side of the road and get down underneath a vehicle. And so there was a gas tank that I knew that the straps had recently been off. There were indicators that the screws had been out. And I don't know if you've ever tapped on a gas tank, but ones that just have gas in them, they have a different sound than one that's loaded.
Okay.
And so I'd smacked on this gas tank, and I knew that it sounded different than the ones that were normally loaded with just gas. And so from that point on, I didn't have necessarily have probable cause that it was a crime being committed, but I had reasonable suspicion.
Okay.
So I asked those individuals if they would, follow me to a shop and let me take a better look at it, which they said yes. And so we got the vehicle to a co-op, stuck it up on a lift, and we had determined that gas tank had been off recently and that it was loaded. So we dropped that gas tank, and there was a compartment inside the gas tank itself that was loaded full of marijuana.
So you said gas tanks were a common hiding place.
Yep.
What's the most unusual hiding place that you found, or most creative?
If there's a place in a vehicle or a semi or a boat or whatever it is, if there's a place that they can put it and think you won't find it, they will.
Right.
And so, panels inside the door, panels along and I'd have to show you a picture to kind of vision this, but they put them in bumpers, tires that were actually on vehicles.
Yeah.
The cartels take these, they're a metal, I guess, compartment that they bolt around tires.
Okay.
And how they get the rubber on back around these tires, I have no clue, because we couldn't get them off without cutting them.
Was there a particular technique that you thought, man, why did they go through all the trouble? But you ever feel like, wow, they just tried way too hard because we ended up finding it anyway?
There are times I thought that, but, drugs are a big thing in our world, and they ruin a lot of lives.
Yeah.
And, methamphetamine now, years ago, they used to cook it here in America, but now it's gotten to where the cartels are making it bigger and better and more powerful. So most of all the methamphetamine is coming from Mexico. Mm-hmm. So they have to have ways to conceal it and get it over here to where it's not easy for law enforcement or whoever's looking for it, Border Patrol, to find it.
Right.
One of them is dashboards. And the cartels are good at creating compartments up in the dash. And so it's a lot of work. And if a guy's not experienced in where to look, it's easy to overlook a compartment in there. But eventually, if you're consistent, then more than likely, you'll find it.
Right.
A canine can be handy and helpful in those situations as well.
Okay, let's talk about the canine. Are there disadvantages? Or is it just always better to have a dog?
A dog is a great tool, and it's just like any tool that a policeman carries on his duty belt or in his car. It is a tool. U.S. Supreme Court has said that a canine sniff is not a search. So that air around your vehicle, you're not entitled to.
Okay.
So the advantage of a canine, not only for finding in compartments, but the advantage of a canine is if a if someone refuses a search, we can run that dog around the vehicle. And then if that dog has an odor response change or hits on the vehicle, then you don't need a warrant to search that vehicle.
Does that become PC?
That is probable cause.
Okay.
Now, there are times that we did go get a warrant, but U.S. Supreme Court says that if the dog hits, you have probable cause to search a vehicle.
What was your dog's name?
Buddy.
Buddy?
Yep.
What kind of dog?
He was a white yellow lab, but he was pure white.
Okay.
And he didn't have a mean bone in his body, but I didn't tell people that. So
That's awesome. That's
but
awesome.
Buddy loved, for a dog, if they find something, it's a game.
Yeah.
And so they always look forward to going to work, and they always look forward to doing their job.
Yeah. How long did Buddy get trained? Do you know?
Buddy was trained for probably 8 months before we got him. He was a puppy.
Okay.
And then I spent a couple weeks at a canine school with him before we brought him back. And at that point, I was working for the sheriff's office. They had recruited me.
Right. No, that's awesome. Have you seen the movie, Clint Eastwood movie, The Mule?
I have.
Okay. Impressions, takeaways, like there's stuff that's just ridiculous, or was it pretty accurate, or what do you feel?
That Hollywood is for entertainment. So Clint, when he would go get drugs, he wouldn't hide them real well. If I remember one scene, he just had it in the bed of his truck.
Yeah.
Now, an unexperienced interdiction officer may walk up and not think anything about it.
Right.
But if you ask enough questions and find out where someone's coming from and where they're going, and I can assure you, in real life, Clint Eastwood would have been nervous knowing that he had a bunch of cocaine and he's sitting here talking to law enforcement.
Yeah.
There would have been some indicator that he was doing something wrong.
Yeah. So you wouldn't just give somebody a pass because they're old?
No. And it's easy to do because we can all look at that person and say, he's probably not involved in doing anything illegal. But you have to ask them the same questions as you would someone that's young.
Yeah. Yeah. See, my problem was that, a different form of interdiction is the airport screenings. And for generations now, they've warned people, don't let somebody give you something. And they're looking for innocent, they're looking for the little grandma because they presume that the terrorist would, give something to the grandma because she might not be searched. So we've known to look at the grandma for a long time before that Clint Eastwood movie came out. Right. And but apparently the grandpa on the highway, he was able to, get those drugs through. And so. Yeah.
Well, and such as our own grandmas, we would never want anybody to think that our grandma could do something like that. Yeah. Because they were so loved. Yeah. And they were just such an integral part of our family that they would have never done that. So I think when an interdiction officer, stops an older couple, it's easy to assume that they're an older couple and they would never do anything like that. Yeah. But it happens frequently.
Yeah. So eventually the cartels in Mexico began to notice your work. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
So I made a stop one time where we seized quite a bit of marijuana out of a vehicle. I got home later that night, and one of our jailers at the time, he looked like a white male, but he was actually Hispanic, and he spoke very good Spanish. And so after the stop was done, and we ended up not doing a controlled delivery with it because they didn't want to cooperate. So I did.
Okay, so back up a second. A controlled delivery, what does that mean?
So if you make an interdiction stop and the suspects are interested in working with you to get a lesser sentence, then we will take that load to wherever it was going. We'll work with law enforcement on the other end. Mm-hmm. So say where I was at, if the load was coming to Kansas City, we would call Kansas City and say, hey, this is what we've got. Are you guys interested in doing the delivery? And they would always say yes. Right. So we would take the vehicle and the bad guys and do a delivery to where it was going.
And then you get the ones that they were going to meet.
Yep.
Okay. So you stopped this guy, and you were not going to do a controlled delivery. And so he was arrested?
Yes, that's correct. Anytime there's a modified compartment on a vehicle, law enforcement seizes that because it's not a factory.
They're not going to get it back.
That's correct. Okay. They were put in jail, and if a bond is set, they can bond out. If I recall in this one, a bond wasn't set at the time because it was a a pretty good load of drugs, and there was no bond set until they saw the judge. I went home, and I was sitting in my chair, and the phone rang, and it was the sheriff's office calling me. And so one of the jailers, he said, "Hey, if you don't mind, I'd like you to come back down to the office. I have something I need to talk to you about, and it's important." I said, "Okay." And I didn't live real far from there, so I drove on down. And what he had ended up telling me is all of the jail phones are recorded at the sheriff's office. And so during one of their phone calls, Vincent had heard this guy saying something that caught his eye. And so he wasn't positive what he was saying, so he went back and listened to the recording. And in this phone call, the suspect that I had arrested, whoever he called, I'm assuming someone down in Mexico where the drugs are coming from, asked him if it was my name that made the traffic stop. And so I don't recall if he said Officer Foster or Deputy Foster, but my name came up, and the guy said, "Yeah, that's who arrested me." And this individual said, "We need to take care of him and get rid of him."
Yeah.
And so that kind of spooked our jailer. So he called me at the time, to let me know about it. It was determined that my spouse would not stay at the house for a few weeks. And we made KBI aware of it, but, nothing ever came of it. But it's one of those things in the back of your mind. It's
like the Cartel put out a hit.
It's kind of a real deal. Yeah. It's a little bit scary.
Yeah.
I didn't live in fear, but there's always the unknown in law enforcement of what can happen.
So you mentioned fear. There's a lot of stress. I mean, I do ride-alongs, and the people talk about what's it like being on the scene of a homicide or whatever. That's really not that stressful.
Right.
But a car stop. There's been car stops where I'm in the passenger seat of the patrol car, and I'm like, this is dangerous because we really don't know what we're walking into.
That's right.
And so that's a lot of stress, even if it goes well, and it goes well every time. It's still stressful.
Sure.
So talk to me about the impact of interdiction work and law enforcement generally on you and on your well-being.
It's one of those things in the moment when you're wrapped up and you're doing the job, you don't think about it. But there's always times after the fact that kind of wake you up to the dangers of the job. One of them for me being it was another interdiction stop. There were two males that I stopped for speed, and I noticed their body language as I was turning around on them. They kept looking back, and I noticed the passenger was making a movement that was consistent with possibly hiding some drugs or a weapon. I wasn't sure at the time, but once I got them stopped, I brought the driver back, and they were extremely nervous. I had ran a triple I on them. Both of them had a criminal record for sale of cocaine. In fact, both of them had just recently been released from prison. Their body language really tipped me off, and I was very in tune. I say in law enforcement, and there's probably guys that can relate to this, there are times in your career where the hairs on the back of your neck will stand up.
Yeah.
And that was one of those for me. And I didn't know in the moment why, but I believed that the good Lord was protecting me. And later in the fact that we got these guys arrested, they had just picked up a load of crack cocaine and were taking it back to another city.
And they'd just been out of prison for the same thing.
They hadn't been out long at all.
Right. So they knew that their number was up.
Yep. And so a couple days later, when I'm going on duty, the sheriff's office has me come in, and one of these guys had an issue, and they needed me to take him to the hospital to get some medication for an issue he had. So I go to the sheriff's office, and he's in a jail outfit, and he's in shackles and cuffs, and I take him to the emergency room. And on the way back to the sheriff's office, he asked me if I worked out a lot. At that point in time, I did. Working the road, I just wanted to be in the best shape I could be in case I had to protect myself or save my life. And so when I told this guy that I'd worked out every day, he made a statement that was good for me. And so I just kind of chuckled. And he said, no, I'm being serious. He said, that's a good thing for you. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, did you see how nervous we were when you were pulling us over? And I said, yep, I noticed it right away. And he said, well, we knew that we were going to go back to prison if we got caught with that. And he said, we really didn't care at that point. He said, well, we had already made a plan to take your service weapon and shoot you with it. He said, but when you walked up, we noticed a confidence in you that we hadn't seen in others. And he said, we also noticed that you were a pretty big guy, and we figured you were the wrong guy to mess with. After he told me that night, I didn't sleep real well.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought through that stop. And, it's in that moment that you realize just how dangerous that this work is.
They had a plan to murder you.
They had a plan to take my gun and shoot me with it.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, the good Lord, thwarted that, and I came out okay. But those are the moments that make you realize when you walk out the door, that might be the last time you ever come home.
Yeah, yeah. And you had multiple situations like that build up over time.
I did,
and it just starts to erode and wear you down. Tell me how things went for you.
So a little bit later in my career, I had lost a really good friend of mine. He was my best friend. And, officers, they look for outlets. If it isn't lifting weights, it's doing something. But over time, if you're not careful, it's easy to pick up a bottle and Band-Aid your pain. And that's what I say is whatever a person starts using, if it's, unfortunately, some officers, they get injured on the job and medication. They get hooked on medication.
Painkillers.
Mine was alcohol.
Yeah.
And over a certain period of time, I started drinking more and more to Band-Aid pain that I was dealing with. Officers, and I think men especially, don't really like to talk about what's going on in their life. It's easier for females to do it, but I think for men it's a pride issue. I worked for a different sheriff's office at the end of my career, and I was a team leader, supervisor on our tactical team, and I was still working interdiction. But life had caught up with me, years of seeing things and trauma.
And also the schedule, being pulled away from family functions and missing time with your loved ones. And I mean, that's a different type of toll, but it's still part of the equation.
It is all part of the equation. It is. Yeah. It all kind of adds up.
Yeah.
And those stressors in life, it may not be one certain thing, or it might be just a volume of many, but things started adding up for me. And I recall after a suicide of a guy I knew, that took a really big toll on me. And so I knew I was in trouble. I was emotionally struggling. The only thing I could think to do on my time away from work was to Band-Aid my pain with booze, to temporarily forget about those problems. But as we all know, that's not how it works. When things, when you can forget about things for a certain amount of time, but they're still there, those problems. And so I went to a doctor and told him what was going on. And, doctors have the best intentions. They have good hearts. But this particular doctor I went and saw, he was older. And he said, I want to give you an antidepressant and help you with sleeping, because I was having a hard time sleeping at night, seeing some reoccurring thoughts of some trauma I'd seen. And so I got on this antidepressant. And, Jared, I was already feeling down, and I started feeling suicidal. But these antidepressants made it tenfold. I felt way worse, and I didn't know it. So over time, that trauma did not get any better, and those antidepressants didn't help. So when I went back to the doctor, I'm not anti-medication. What I can tell you is, you start getting on too much stuff, they can't all work together.
Yeah.
And so the doctor, added more stuff, and there's a sense of shame and guilt that goes with that, because you look at all your coworkers and think, well, they're not dealing with that. Why am I?
They're all fine.
And they're not fine.
No.
They struggle and deal with things a different way. After being on those medications, some events happened in my career that came to an end, and I ended up trying to take my life. And, nobody really wants to die. Life is good. There's a lot of great things about living, and God does a lot of great things in our lives. But what most people want is the pain to end.
Yes.
And I was struggling with that deep pain.
Yeah.
I was seeing a counselor at that time and trying to work through these things that I didn't know what was going on in my life. But I was still going to work every day and putting on a smile and trying to hide that pain, mask it from everybody. Well, in my very last year of working, there was a state trooper that was a friend of mine. And I can recall the exact day it happened because he was out working. And I saw him sitting on the side of the road with someone in his car. And I knew that something was going wrong or something was up because you could just tell by body language that these two people were arguing. It was my friend that was the trooper and a female in there. I just assumed maybe it was his spouse, but I didn't know. But after his car being out there for quite a while, it was gone the last time I drove by. And so I was just about to get off duty and go home for the day. And our 911 center got a 911 call from a female at a parking lot at a junior college. And they said there was an officer shot in his patrol car. And so, of course, units rush out there thinking an officer had been
attacked
or shot by an unknown subject. And it boiled down to this trooper ended up shooting himself after that was his wife in the car. And they were having marital issues. And I believe that he just found out his marriage was over. And when she got out and left, he shot himself in his patrol car. And that really sparked some deep depression in me because I had been thinking about doing the same thing for a while, but I couldn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
But here I was going to work every day, still taking these antidepressants that were making me very suicidal, putting on a happy face.
Yeah.
But a little bit later that month, both of my grandparents ended up passing away. And so I struggled with that. In October of that same year, I was at the sheriff's office about to go out and do some interdiction, and we got a 911 call of a small child not breathing at a residence. I recognized that residence, but I couldn't place who it was. And, when a child's not breathing, everybody's chaotic and everybody goes.
Yeah.
And so I ran out of the sheriff's office, jumped in my car, and went to that address. Well, this was not only my best friend at the time, but he was also one of my partners. He was a sheriff deputy. It was his son that we got the call to. And I pretty well knew once we got in there that he had probably passed away.
Yeah.
But EMS, they came in and started doing CPR on him and then loaded him up and took him to the hospital. We all went to the hospital to support him. And, I'm in uniform and I'm bawling and moping like a baby because this kid was not only just like my own son, but he was one of my best friend's kids.
Yeah.
And I knew him very well.
Yeah.
And it was just like a Hollywood movie in the ER where I could see those emergency doors swinging open and I could see that staff frantically trying to save his life.
Yeah.
And after about 40 minutes, that doctor came out and, I get choked up talking about it, but he came out and he said there's nothing more they could do.
Yeah.
And he had passed away. And so, I'm struggling with that.
Multiple losses, people close to you.
Multiple losses.
Yeah.
And that was October. And then in December, a friend of mine was shot and killed on a domestic disturbance call from another agency. And I can just tell you the sadness of going to that funeral because I knew his son pretty well. We were both pretty involved with the Special Olympics. And so I knew this gentleman pretty well. We'd been to several trainings together. And being at a funeral of an officer that had been gunned down and killed, just all that buildup took a toll on me. And my career came to an end a month later.
Okay. Tell me what your life looks like now.
So right now I am the Safety and Security Administrator of City Union Mission. We are a faith-based homeless shelter in the Kansas City area. We're the largest homeless shelter in Kansas City.
Yeah.
And so I am over the security team there, and I have just a bunch of amazing people that work for me. And I love what I do. I love serving the homeless and doing God's work.
Yeah, I've done a tour in your office. I came in and they had all the security cameras up and they gave me a tour. You had a good team there.
Yeah.
I was real impressed.
I love all my team very much. From the CEO of the company, he's very, very supportive of security. And my boss, Andy, he's a retired Missouri trooper. And then you've met Anthony. Yeah. Anthony's got a lot of years of experience in security. And all of my people, I love them all. They're just they're good people.
Do you feel good?
I do feel good. You know, there's times when things start to float back. I think all of us, you know, depending on where we've been in life, there's what they call triggers. And we're always gonna battle some of those things, but it's what we do with them. And so I have a good group of men. I'm involved in a really good church. And I just have a good core group of men that I don't have to fear telling things to, because that's the thing with men. Again, for me, it was just pride, shame, and guilt. And telling someone what you've been through, a lot of times we expect judgment. Yeah. But I have a group of men that never judge, because they've had their baggage as well and their trauma. Yeah. And so we work through things together, and we pray for one another, and we look at things with a whole different light. And I can tell you, without Jesus Christ in my life, I would probably be 6 feet under. But God had a vision and a purpose for me, and I had to believe that as well.
Yeah. You've mentioned several good things in your life right now. What's another blessing that you have that you wouldn't have had if you'd taken your life years ago?
Well, my current spouse, she's an amazing, godly woman.
She's even willing to love an ex-cop?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yep, for sure. And she just has such a heart of gold. Her heart is from the Lord, and she's the real deal. She has the best outlook on life I've ever seen of anybody that I've ever been around. And so that is amazing to me. And God works through her, along with many other people in my life that I'm surrounded by.
Well, as we're recording this, it's a Saturday afternoon in the summertime, and you rode up on your motorcycle. And Troy, you looked happy.
Yeah. Well, I love my bike. I call it wind therapy. I'm a musician, a drummer by trade, and so, you know, I used to lift weights a lot when I was in law enforcement, and since I've been out of it, I like to work out, but my stress relief is in some drumsticks or my motorcycle.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
Troy, thank you for coming in and talking to me today.
Well, thank you so much, Jared. I appreciate everything you do and what you do for our community. Thank you.
I know that as a police chaplain, I can't stop bad things from happening to you or you having terrible reactions to the accumulation of tragedy and grief to which you're exposed. But it's my prayer that even if everything comes crashing down and marriages and careers end when you don't expect them to, that you could still turn out something like Troy Foster, that hope could be restored, that things in your life that have been burnt down and stripped away could possibly be regained, at least in part, and some of them could be realized even better than what you had before. I believe that's possible, no matter how bad things have become. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain. When trainers for fire and law enforcement and probably lots of other fields are stealing your cartoons to put them in their PowerPoints, who owns that? Is that yours, or does that belong to these websites or magazines that you've worked for?
No, so I have ownership of it.
Okay, so they're stealing from you, right?
Yes, they are. They are, and the check is always in the mail.
Right, I'm sure. Yeah.
You know, here's the thing. If they are using this for training purposes, even when they reach out to me, I always give them permission to do it, because that is the purpose of the work that I'm doing. Again, this isn't just a gag cartoon I'm putting out there. Right. These cartoons have a message behind them. They're editorial in nature.
This show is free for everyone because of those supporters who are quietly helping behind the scenes. If you want to help this show reach more cops, chaplains, and other first responders around the world, please consider making a $5 donation. by following the link in the episode description. The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, pray for peace in our city.